always imported food from all around the world, Nigel, but anyway, that...
But it should be easier now.
No, because we've got worse terms since Brexit.
Outside the CAP.
We've got worse deals now. Now we're out of the European Union.
Which is completely insane.
At last, the weather has changed and dried up, and we have been able to turn the cattle outside into the fields, having been shut up for 7 months in the sheds. Also, yesterday, I went on GB News to talk to Nigel Farage about Rishi Sunak's Farm to Fork summit, which, in my view, is all about trying to woo the farming and rural votes. Presumably, he's a bit worried about his own constituency, which is exactly that, heavily reliant on farming. What is interesting with Nigel is that he wants to be seen as the man of the countryside, but he runs into problems because one of the most destructive things for British farming is the reality of Brexit. And as you will see when you watch the interview, it's difficult for Nigel to start being concerned about farming without being critical of Brexit.
A gathering, apparently, of all the great and good from British farming, and Rishi Sunak, they're giving a speech talking about food production. But let's just remind ourselves of what this government since 2019 has done to British farming. Here was Boris Johnson at the Conservative Party conference just over 3 years ago.
We are going to rewild parts of the country and consecrate a total of 30% to nature. We're planting tens of millions of trees. Otters are returning to rivers from which they have been absent for decades. Beavers that have not been seen on some rivers since Tudor times, massacred for their pelts and now back. And if that isn't conservatism, my friends, I don't know what is. Build back beaver, I say.
It's just absolutely cringe-making, isn't it, to watch it? So Boris wanted to take 30% of UK farmland out of food production. Let's be clear, that's what his plan was. And also, of course, the mad rush to net zero has meant that much of our good farmland and some of our less good farmland has been turned over, of course, to solar farms. I can't think of any government in modern times that has done more to stop British food production. But, hey, today, apparently, that's all changed. Here was Rishi Sunak in the garden of number 10. And watch this clip and think to yourself, if you're giving a speech and right next to you a military band is playing the national anthem, would you have carried on with the speech or would you have stopped and stood to attention? Watch this.
That's why today it's the second Farm to Fork Summit. We said we would start this, and oh, there we go, fantastic. And I'm very keen to make sure that we do keep producing more of the nation's food, because this issue matters to me personally. Today, we're doing something that many of you have asked us to do rightly for years, and that's to publish our first ever draft UK-wide food security index, which I think is a landmark moment in this conversation. We've committed to publishing it annually. It will allow us to monitor and keep an eye on in-year shocks and make sure that we can maintain our commitments on food production as set out in our food strategy, and ensure that we back you all the way. So the band are doing it better than me. Let me just close with saying an enormous thank you and enjoy the morning.
Well, 2 points there. The first is, I'm told many in the crowd did stand to attention because, you know, the band were playing the national anthem. Sunak chose not to. Well, that was an odd choice. But what about the content of what he had to say? We're on your side. We're with you. And we're going to appoint a new commissioner for tenant farming. Yes. What we're going to do is bureaucratise farming even more. And that's really, really going to help you. And we're going to launch a new food security index to measure how much of the fruit and veg that we consume is produced in this country. Well, it is just pure electioneering. And as I say, it runs completely contrary to everything that we tried to do in Boris Johnson's time. But I guess that's politics. Well, I said all the great and the good of British farming were invited. One person who wasn't invited is Liz Webster from Save British Farming. And Liz has been in the studio before with us. Liz, of course, very much behind the recent farming protests. So that they didn't want you there?
No, we didn't get an invitation.
Why?
I don't know.
And
you would have thought we'd be invited, but also Farmers Weekly weren't invited. You know, that is the one magazine that really is about farming. You know, even Jeremy Clarkson talks about Farmers Weekly, but Rishi left them out. So that really shows he wasn't serious about farming.
Yeah, and you saw the point I made about government policy was rewilding, the encouragement of solar farms, and now suddenly they want us to produce more of our own food. And I know that we're in post-Brexit Britain, and you and I disagreed on that, but we are where we are. And I understand that after 47 years of accepting policy from elsewhere, we have to start thinking for ourselves. And I get that that's not always going to be an immediate or smooth transition, but I mean, what is the real... I mean, this is just pure electioneering today. What is the real message to farming from government?
Well, it is pure electioneering, and it's trying to make out that if they're re-elected, I guess, that they will start to listen. But quite frankly, it's very, very late in the day. Anything he said today, we know we're facing a Labour government, even if we don't have enough farmers anyway. If they do decide to vote for the Conservatives, which I don't think a lot of them will, you know, they're not going to get these promises delivered. And it's also worth remembering that Rishi Sunak was Chancellor before he was Prime Minister. He had his hands on the till, and we started protesting in that year, 2020, as the Agriculture Act was going through Parliament, and we said, where's the food plan? There was never a food plan.
But now
it was an environmental act. It's not an agriculture act.
Now he's launching a food security index.
Look, they tore up, and it was a major tear-up between our trade, especially for agriculture, with the European Union. And then they changed all of the laws to look after agriculture and turned around and said, don't worry, farmers, put your cap on and go out and cut the hedges and plant some flowers. And if you're lucky, put a solar park in if the grid can cope with it to get a bit of income. And largely that's what they've done to us. And yeah, I probably wasn't invited because if I had the opportunity to ask Rishi something, this is exactly what I'd be saying, because we're now in a really dangerous situation on food. We have, since Brexit happened, we've become more reliant on food from Europe than ever before.
Which is bonkers, because actually one of the points of Brexit was it would be easier to import food from and cheaper from other parts of the world.
Well,
but we
always imported food from all around the world, Nigel. But anyway,
but it should be easier now.
No, because we've got worse terms since Brexit.
Outside the CEP,
we've got worse deals now. Now we're out of the European Union.
Which is completely insane. On net zero, you mentioned solar farms a moment ago, and the government, the big drive to net zero, the same thing happening across the whole of Europe, of course, and many regulations on nitrates, etc. Big protests in France, big protests in the Netherlands and elsewhere, protests here. Do you think there's a sort of slow reversal coming on some of that net zero stuff?
I really can't say. We need to drive the economy somehow, and the money is there in solar farms. I think, to be fair, we ought to be doing more what they are doing on the continent and putting more solar panels on structures, existing structures rather than fields. But farmers who own their farms are absolutely going to want a solar farm because they've lost their subsidies, and it means they've got income coming in. I
certainly see them springing up all over Kent and elsewhere at the moment. And we face a Labour government. John Curtis, the doyen of political commentators, says it's 99% certain that Sir Keir Starmer will be in number 10. What are Labour saying to farming, to fishing?
Labour are listening, and they're asking us our opinion, which is really good. I think Labour understand that we need a food plan. But because so much food, British food, has been destroyed, we have to accept that we can't ramp up production. And this is the ridiculous thing about Rishi Sunak today, saying, oh, yes, we're all going to be able to produce so much food. It takes ages to ramp up production. We've lost 2 massive salad growers in this country. They've done nothing to help that. They've actually didn't help the fertiliser plants to keep open. They wanted a £10 million...
That was an odd one, wasn't it?
Yeah, a £10 million loan. So now we're reliant on imported fertiliser. There is nothing that they've done which is good, but it means we're more reliant on food than ever. So I would say we need to reduce these dreadful trade barriers, and these new checks that have come in,
yes,
are a disaster.
I honestly don't understand why we're doing that.
We need to make sure that we don't get for biosecurity. That is one of the issues.
Yes. But there is such a thing as trusted traders, and we do know there are reputable people that regularly sell
anything that comes from anywhere in the world via Rotterdam gets shoved in here.
Yeah, it's very...
And that's the problem with leaving the European Union so quickly.
Hang on a second. The biosecurity problems there, whether you're members of the European Union or not. It's a question.
Well, no, because we were members of a central system, which meant it was filtered through. So we were sort of a member of like a liver almost, which filtered it through.
We've still got to think about biosecurity, but the fact we're putting checks on at this moment in time seems nuts to me.
The simplest thing to do,
food production is the key to this, and you're arguing that food production has reduced since they've been in government. Do you think these words today will actually encourage more people to grow food? You don't, do you?
Well, the only way they're going to encourage farmers to grow is by putting money in their pockets and giving them a policy and a food plan.
What subsidy?
We need to, at the moment, we're being subsidised to do environmental things. We're not being encouraged to, and there's so much risk involved in growing food, and we've got food on our shelves now which is being labelled British, which isn't British, undercutting us, and it's causing massive, massive problems.
Farming, politically, always very difficult, but I do think one of the things we've got here is a government that seesawed over the course of the last 5 years and left much uncertain. We will come back to farming, fishing and many other complications in the weeks and months to come.
The only way we can solve the food and farming crisis is by actually getting rid of Brexit as quickly as possible. The only other option is to do the American trade deal, which is looking difficult, and that will also cause problems with Ireland and likely Scotland. The union will break. And we'll probably end up in a terrible trade war. So the only answer to ensure that we've got enough food for the country is to agree that we need to rejoin the European Union. And we won't get the same terms as we had previously, but the deal that we will get is going to be an awful lot better than the deal we've got at the moment. Hope you enjoyed watching the video. Do comment below and let me know what you think, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe.